Guys, welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have Eric Forrest, formerly of Tucson, Arizona, but now lives in Mesa, Arizona. He's a Coues deer nut, and I always love having him on the podcast. Eric, how you doing?
Good, Jay. You?
Good. I got to say, those Wildcats, they're 4-1. The Sun Devils are 4-1. It could be a big game come November 30th, couldn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be a divided household over here.
Last time we talked, you were just recovering from eye surgery.
Yep.
How's it going?
Perfect. That's some minor issues with glare, but last time I went in, I had 20/10 vision, so that's better than I've ever had. So I've actually been able to go out and go shed hunting and go deer scouting. So I've been able to test them out, and they seem to be doing okay.
So where was your vision before that? I mean, did you have to wear glasses? Did you have to wear contacts?
Yeah, I wear. I started wearing contacts when I was 13, and I wouldn't be able to see without them. I had, on a good day, about 2400 vision. Wow. So I was basically blind as a bat.
So how has that affected you looking through binoculars? I mean, have you truly been able to see a huge difference?
It's about the same, as far as I can remember. It's about now compared to when I had contacts. It's about the same.
Okay.
Basically, they just put a contact lens inside my eye this time, so it's a little bit closer to my actual lens. So I was looking at some deer the other day up here, and was able to pick out a little bit finer details through the Swarovskis of a buck that was bedded. So that helped tremendously.
So as a kid growing up and in high school, did you actually wear glasses, or did you actually, wear contacts every day?
I think I wore glasses up through middle school. They were always a pain. I remember before I even knew I needed glasses, my dad took me out rabbit hunting, and there was a rabbit about 20 yards away, and I couldn't see it. And he didn't understand why I couldn't see this rabbit. So that was the day I went and got glasses. But yeah, in high school I picked up contacts, and it was much easier to shoot, much easier to glass. I've had times where I've had to take out my contacts and wear glasses, especially getting geared up for that ICL surgery. I had to be out of contacts for weeks, and man, glassing with glasses was not fun. And my vision was so poor, even looking through the Swarovskis, trying to adjust the focus without glasses, it wasn't the same.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, we're right here, kind of the middle of October, and at the end of the month here, we've got Coues deer hunts, kicking off. The general season Coues deer hunts, there are youth hunts going on right now, but
yep.
General October, what we call the early October hunts, or the early season hunts, kicking off at the end of the month and then rolling into November. Before we really dive into that, you have made a transition from living and growing up in southern Arizona in the Tucson area to recently, within the last year or so, moving up to the Phoenix area, living in Mesa. And we've talked a little bit about your transition from, being so close in Tucson to those units that, literally any one direction you can go and find a Coues deer, to, being up in the Phoenix area, which definitely still has Coues deer, but probably not, you can't just go in any one direction. And we've talked about that transition a little bit before that, or on other podcasts. I was just curious how that transition is going, how your scouting's going, and any thoughts that jump out at you.
Yeah, it's been sort of a rough transition, not as easy as I thought it was going to be honest with you. I just, like you said, back home you could pretty much take any road that leads to mountains and find deer. Here it's a little bit more pockety for sure. I'm kind of fortunate because I live on the east side of the valley, so I can get on Bush Highway pretty quick, or 87. But having said that, I think those are the more popular areas. What I'm sort of finding out, seems like every time I I go into an area, I find some, a pocket of deer. I compare notes with guys that are already here, saying, hey, I'm in this spot. Is this something that you're already running, just to make sure I'm not on their toes? And 10 times out of 10, they've been to that spot, or they know other guys that are in that spot. So yeah, it's super popular. I found some bucks, nothing super spectacular yet. Definitely a lot lower densities of all animals around here. Javelina, mule deer, Coues deer. But I think that's just because it's so such close proximity to a large city.
Yeah.
Not sure exactly why the deer numbers are so much lower, but yeah, it is for sure a lot more pockety than back home.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think the Phoenix metro area is 5 or 6 million. I want to say it's like the fifth or sixth, maybe seventh largest city in the country, and we don't really. I mean, it kind of snuck up on me, to be honest with you, when I saw that stat. But then you go down to Tucson, and I don't know exactly, but it's maybe 1 million. You might know better than me, but it's a huge difference when you have a place that's 5 or 6 times bigger. And then you take the fact that you can't go in any one direction. Like in Tucson, literally you could drive any direction and hit, and jump into deer. As you say, living over on the eastern part of Phoenix, you do have a little bit of, advantage because there definitely are Coues deer on that eastern part of Phoenix, or proximity. So it's just interesting to hear the different perspectives, and certainly from someone like you that, is a Coues deer nut like yourself, and, deer nut in general, to just hear how your transition's going. And so what do you have on your plate upcoming as far as Coues deer hunts this fall? Do you have any yourself personally? I believe you shot an archery buck, so I think you're out of the game, but yeah, you've got buddies and such. What do you have cooking?
So Tristan's girlfriend, she has a hunt. It's a November 8th hunt, and then he got lucky and drew that late December tag.
Okay.
So he's got a particular buck he's trying to go after that's been pretty much a ghost. So I'm gonna try to get off work and go run down there and help him and her. They're actually going to the range today to get her squared away on a rifle and go out scouting today as well. So I'm excited to hear how he does there. Hoping I can get down and make some scouting trips with them to get prepared for those hunts.
That's Savannah, right? His girlfriend?
Yeah, it's Savannah.
She's the one that shot that drop tine buck?
Yeah, the 2 drop tines in a row. Yeah.
Yeah, unbelievable. I know we talked about that on the last podcast. And then fill me in again on what you're doing for work up in the Phoenix area.
So I'm in the process with Mesa Police Department still, and in the meantime, I was applying to Amazon for a position that kind of was a little bit more geared and for what I studied in college as a security risk analyst. And so I got an offer for that position. I actually start Monday, so after this weekend, my first day there. So yeah.
And I noticed too on your Instagram page you have your own Amazon store. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I discovered that earlier in the year. Basically, it's just kind of like a they call it a storefront, and I can just put on. I always have. I'm sure you. I mean, I see in your story all the time. Guys are asking you for gear, and so it was a way for me to put on like the trail cameras that I recommend, all the products that I recommend the most to have in your pack that you can get through Amazon, and the best deals that I can find for those products. Because before that storefront, I was always going on there just taking screenshots of Amazon products or links and then sending them to guys. So it was just a more convenient way to put things up there. Just tell guys to go look at the link and look at my lists. But I actually, for the Amazon storefront, I get a little bit of a kickback from anything that's purchased through the link. So say like if you wanted to go get a stealth cam, and say the stealth cam's like $150, I'll get a percentage of that. It's super small, so I might get like $5 from a $150 purchase, but that's a memory card there, or something. So it definitely helps out with scouting, especially. Yeah.
It's stuff too that I went on your store and looked. It's stuff that you use. It's not like you just plastered a bunch of stuff. So it's gear that you use, and it's a cool idea. I think it's pretty neat that you're doing that, and you can take your expertise with trail cameras and some of the different things that you've already weeded through and figured out what works best, and take some guy that's maybe just getting into trail cameras. He can kind of hit the ground running and just say, Eric, what do I need? Dial me in, and you go, you need this, this, and this. And so that's pretty cool. All right, well, let's dive into one of our favorite subjects, and that's Coues deer. And I guess the biggest thing is with these hunts coming up in October, this year, I've talked about it on other podcasts, it's actually going to be a dark moon for this first October hunt. How significant do you think on these early hunts when the temperature is still warm, how big of an impact do you think having a dark moon plays as opposed to maybe the same time period and having a full moon? Because I believe last year at the same time it was full on those October hunts. How do you think that's going to play out this year for the guys out there that have the October and even that early November hunt?
Yeah, I was just listening to your most recent podcast with Dwayne Adams when he was talking about the moon there. It's just interesting stuff. I've always used the solar lunar charts because they seem to align with activity that I see as far as the activity times. But a lot of the time those solar lunar charts say it's going to be a poor day, and then like with my buck this year, the day I went out, it said it was rated like 18% poor day. And I ended up killing that buck about like 10 or 11 o'clock. Yeah. So I use those solar lunar charts just for the times specifically. I've tried to pay attention to the moon phases and how activity is going to be. I have never personally noticed a trend because I kind of take the motto, just you're going to have to take what you get. If the hunt has a new moon, then so be it. The deer are going to be there. They're not going to just vanish off the hillside. So they're there somewhere. If they're bedded, going to have to slow down glassing and start picking apart things a little bit more carefully. If they're up moving, great. Either way, you got to hunt. But I've always had the sort of bro science-y theory that if it's new moon and it's dark during the night, they're less likely to feed at night. And they might be feeding more in the morning versus if it's full moon at night, they have a lot of light. I'm sure they'd probably feel a little bit more comfortable feeding through the night. But, I might just speaking out my butt there. I don't know if that's actually true or not.
No, I think a lot of it is, perception and your experience and what you've noticed and what have you. I've been getting, the moon is pretty darn full right now. It's been bright, and I've been getting messages from guys saying, man, it's the moon's killing us. And I do think, we as hunters can put too much emphasis on the moon or no moon or try and make it an excuse. But it also, I think, you bring up a point of, typically in a new moon, it's dark during the night. Typically Coues deer maybe are not up feeding as much, which puts them up feeding and on their feet a little bit more, and that's kind of what I've noticed. But I do kind of like how you approach it, that you don't really care whether it's a full moon or a new moon. You're going to, stay in there and try and find your bucks anyway. I think for some of the new hunters out there, I think any time that you can hunt around a new moon when it's dark during the night, you're going to have a little bit better chance of picking those deer up on their feet. For some of the guys that are more experienced like you, Eric, knowing where to look when they're bedded, knowing where to expect them kind of plays into the experience that you've had. But I personally think hunting in a full moon, you might as well, it's sometimes hard to glass them at first light, especially if it's hot and at last light. But, sometimes from 10 to 2 during the middle of the day, they'll get up and feed for a half hour just because they fed all night, and they laid up while it's cool, and then even though it's hot, they get up and do a little feeding in the shade, shift their position and bed back down. So that's, something that Coues deer hunters, need to think about. I'm going to go through kind of a series of questions with you, but, someone that's hunted Coues deer a lot, what are some tips that you would give to the guys that are hunting these early seasons?
There's a ton of tips. If I could give, would you want just three main tips?
Yeah,
and we can maybe dive into them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my main tips for these upcoming rifle hunts is one, you have to scout. That's to me that's a necessary if you want your best chance of being successful. And two, you have to come prepared, and that means a lot of things. Being prepared by getting a partner to come help you to glass and on the hunt ahead of time, getting that squared away, and also checking your gear and creating a list. And one thing I've always done in the past is I've reached out to more veteran hunters and asked them, what do you carry in your pack and why? And most of the time, I know out of experience, the things that you have in your pack, you've needed at one point. So I try to cut the hard lessons out and learn from other guys of what they have in their pack and why. That way, I don't get in the same situation when I need something. And then the third thing is to, like we were talking about earlier, is just you got to be persistent, whether or not no matter what the conditions are, if it's new moon, full moon, if it's windy, rainy, keep persistent, and that'll always lead to success.
Yeah, I think those are three really good tips. Your first one of scouting, I get a lot of questions on my Instagram storyboard, and it involves scouting, and it involves, guys saying, well, how do you think the hunt's going to be coming up? And, one of my answers always is, well, your success directly is attributed to the amount of scouting that you've done.
Yep.
And then subsequently, afterwards I'll get DM messages and they'll be saying, oh, I haven't done any scouting, and I understand that, some guys just have only so much time and they've got families and they don't have, lots of time to devote to scouting. But as you pointed out, the more that you can get out there and learn the country, the more that you can get out and look for particular bucks, the more that you can get out and just look for deer in general. Scouting plays a huge role in a lot of, guys like yourself's success in, harvesting these bucks. And especially, I think, Eric, don't you think, in the early seasons when the movement is not as plentiful, say, as it is in the December or even in the January during the rut, where maybe guys, they can just go out and glass up on a hillside and, see 20, 30, 40 deer in a day, whereas on these early hunts, a lot of times those bucks and those deer are right there, but they're really not that visible. And if you don't know they're there, by not scouting, you're just going to move on, and you just had a golden opportunity right in front of you, but you didn't do, you didn't look for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 20 days or whatever it would be to know that buck's right there, and that Coues deer stay in virtually the same area all the time. And if I just sit here long enough, I'm going to find that buck. Most guys, will pop up their binos. They look for 30 minutes. They don't see anything, and they're off and moving. How much of that, scouting day after day after day throughout the summer, and knowing a buck is there, how much do you think that plays into the success of, the big bucks getting shot?
Oh, it's pretty much everything. Unless you're a consistent lottery winner, you gotta put the work in. I always look at it like homework. I look at scouting like homework, and I look at the hunt as the test. That's how it comes across in my mind. When the hunt comes, that's when you're going to be put to the test, whether or not you can make it happen. And in school, I'm sure everybody can remember when you didn't study for your test, didn't do your homework, you did pretty crappy on the test, right?
Right.
So in college, I always tried to take advantage of homework. I even made my own homework assignments. I was always trying to put the work in so I did well on the test, and that's the same thing with scouting. I try to get out as many days as I can. If that's convincing my girl that that hey, if I go out and if I go scouting this many days, I'll be done in the hunt and be back home a lot sooner. If I have to do that, or if I have to try to sneak out at 3 a.m. in the morning, or go sneak out at night to go check cameras, that's you got to make it happen. But scouting is huge for having consistent success. I'm typically, I'm obsessed, so I don't know what kind of a comparison it is, but I'm typically out there right after January, February through pretty much the whole year I'm out looking. It's kind of just a good excuse to get out there and get hiking around and look at deer, but I'm pretty much trying to...
How much of that, Eric, sorry to interrupt, but how much of that, right after the rut and jumping right back in and trying to get on those bucks and pattern those bucks and run your cameras, how much of that, even like Savannah's bucks, there's lots of examples of deer that you've shot or helped with in your buddies and what have you, where about a particular deer and you've jumped on it not like 2 weeks before the season, like a full year before the season, and tried to pattern and get as much data as you could on that deer way ahead of time. How much does that play into your success?
It's huge. Right after January, I tried it. That's in February. Those bucks are still moving around for does. They might not be in their normal spots, but that's a good way to at least discover a buck. And then you can go work backwards and try to figure out where he came from. But yeah, getting out there and trying to put as many days as you can on a buck to figure out. You kind of want to get. To me, it's like an accumulation of data. So you want to figure out where a buck is most of the time and where he goes when he's not in his typical spot. And that's the thing with Savannah's buck, is he was in a certain spot, like a very, very, very small area, but sometimes he wasn't. And the trick is those days we need to figure out when he's not in this spot, we need to figure out where he's at. So when the hunt comes and he's not in his normal spot, where do we need to look? And we're struggling. There's a buck that Tristan's trying to hunt right now, and we're struggling with that because same thing with Savannah's buck. He's in this tiny little, kind of like a little bowl, but he disappeared right before the archery hunt and is very, very sporadic on the camera. And I was telling Tristan we need to expand our range a little bit, start looking a little bit farther out to figure out where this buck is going to, and not just where he's been.
Don't you think, too, that's a good example of those deer also can be right there and not hitting the camera, and it can play on you mentally where you think that buck's gone, and the reality is, no, he just hasn't come by the camera.
Yeah, and that was actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because there was times where Tristan would glass that deer up in that bowl, and we weren't getting any pictures of him. But the deer, we would watch him walk literally 50 yards from the camera, and he wouldn't be on camera at all. But yeah, Tristan has gone in there and tried to glass that deer and hasn't seen him at all since about May. He's been on the camera since May, but we haven't been able to lay eyes on him in the glass, and that just comes down to we needed to be a little bit of a wider area, looking at different hillsides, figuring out what other areas he frequents to be able to actually find him.
For sure. For those guys, to take this one step further, for those guys out there that are listening, that maybe they haven't had the time or they haven't made the time to scout, going into the actual hunt, these late October hunts, these early November hunts, if you haven't had the luxury of scouting, what are some things that you would be particular about, and what would you be doing if you know in your heart you hadn't scouted the way you should?
I'd try to be as smart about it as I could. Putting myself in those shoes, if I hadn't scouted for a hunt and was going in, I would try to get a partner. It always helps when you have a second set of eyes, not only going to kill the animal, but finding the animal in the first place. I don't know how many times I've been with guys and I'm not seeing crap, and then and then the guy, someone behind me is like, "Hey, I got a buck," I was just out helping the guy and helping a couple guys on this guy's upcoming tag, and one of the central units up here, and I wasn't seeing crap, and the guy glassed up, $4, and that's where all the bucks were. It was just a tiny little pocket. But I glassed over them, so it's always helpful to have someone there. It's good to be smart about choosing where to glass. I mean, you referenced Dwayne Adams' podcast about glassing into the shadows. I think he illuminated a little bit better that angle to dangle thing that he does with getting on the hill, being on the hillside to look into the right little pocket of where a deer could be. And when I was with that guy recently up here, with the most mature buck we glassed up, he bedded up early in the day or early in the morning. But he was only up for probably about 15 minutes and bedded down. But he bedded down next to this rock in the shadow. But we had to be in that spot to look in there to see his rack, and that's all you could see. Right. So it's important to if you haven't scouted, is pay attention to where you're looking. Try to look in the best spots, and really what I do when I'm glassing is I try to prove that there isn't a deer in every shadow instead of the other way around, or that there is a deer in every shadow instead of the other way around. That way, you're not looking there. Yeah, that way you're not looking there and just like, oh, there's no deer here. So every little shadow I look in and through the brush, I try to prove that there's a deer in every little nook and cranny.
So in other words, when you're looking, you find those little shady pockets as the sun, an hour after first light, starts to form different angles of shade, and you start hitting those shade pockets, and you're going, okay, where's the deer in that shade? Okay, where's the deer in that shade? And obviously you're moving along and not seeing some deer, but you're looking with anticipation, and I think that's a huge tip for people out there is you need to glass with anticipation. You need to be testing your eyes and going, is that a twig or is that an antler? Is that a black rock or is that a black Coues deer nose? Is that, and not just be glossing over. And I think you can get, in a rhythm where you're not seeing much and you just start scanning and you don't start really detail-oriented glassing and picking out little things. But I like that tip that you say, you expect them to be there and glass like they are there, not like they're not.
Yeah.
That's really good stuff. One other thing I would point out first, guys out there and this goes even with scouting, but if you're going into a hunt and you do have a buddy like Eric says, I never like to sit next to each other. That doesn't mean that we're not sometimes in the same general area, but we could be 30, 40, 50 yards apart, or we could be on different mountaintops. But the important thing is I see lots of pictures and there's guys and they're literally sitting right next to, there's like 5 guys in a photo and they're all literally sitting next to each other glassing. And while I've done that at some times, I find more effective is if you can get 40, 50, 60 yards away, a whole hill away, change your angle, be looking at a different angle. It seems like you can cover more country and be a little bit more efficient, and it always helps when you have a glassing partner that's, whether it's his tag or not, or whether he's just helping, if they can be into it, just as much as you are. And if you're a helper on some of these upcoming hunts, I mean, be energetic, be the guy that's keeping everybody motivated and going, and those are always great hunting partners to have around. I wanted to touch on your second point of, knowing the gear and having the right gear on the hunts and what have you. One piece of gear, and it seems so trivial, but I think you'll probably laugh, is I always like having a good pair of tweezers or like hemostats. Because, and I know you'd laugh because being a Coues deer hunter, you know why, because it seems like everything in Coues deer country pokes at you. And having a good set of tweezers to pull out cactus spines and mesquite thorns and all sorts of things that you get poked with in Coues deer country, I think it's something that gets overlooked. And I've pointed it out before and had people message me and say, having a good pair of tweezers is probably the best thing I could have possibly had. I'm curious if there's anything like that, that maybe something you wouldn't think of, any piece of gear that you recommend.
Oh man, the tweezers is a good one because I've been there so many times. I even carry a small, like a really small multi-tool. It's got a tiny little pliers on it for those thick thorns that those tweezers just won't grip.
I got a funny story about that while you're thinking of something. We were hunting Coues there I think it was on the San Carlos, if it's the trip I was remembering, and I fell directly back in a prickly pear cactus and had literally cactus. We were trying to shoot a buck and had just cactus spines, the little wispy ones, those ones that are just, and so we made a big joke. When I got back to camp, I was telling Dar, I need help, and he's like, no, I'm not helping. He goes, call your cousin. He's right here. That's a family thing. I'm not going to do that. So I kept begging my cousin, please come over and help me, and he never did. But it's good tweezers are a must. Yeah, they are. I'm trying to think of things comparable to tweezers. It's hard to measure up to tweezers. I think little scissors too, like little tiny surgical scissors. You never know if you if you fall and you need to if you need to cut something, that would be huge. Yeah, I have every year I look through I have a med kit that I throw on my pack, and I make sure I have little surgical scissors, make sure everything in there is good to go. Some other essential gear that I can think of are little external chargers for your phone. When you're out there with a buddy, because you're taking videos with your phone scope and whatnot, and you end up draining your battery all the way down. It's nice to have that. A good butt pad for glassing. I like. Sometimes I don't take one, but if I know if I'm going to a spot where I know I'm going to spend a lot of time before moving, or if it's wet out or cold, I'll try to bring a good butt pad to keep me warm and kind of out of the elements. And it does make a difference when you're sitting there for a long time glassing. And then another thing is some sort of a shade system, whether that's an extra T-shirt or some sort of a cloth or something to throw over your head. I always throw something over my head while I'm glassing because it just darkens everything around me. So all I can see is the sight picture through my Swarovskis, and it brightens the picture up through my Swarovskis too. So all little details looking through those binos pop out because everything's dark around me. It also keeps the sun off my face. It helps with a lot with the fatigue of glassing. That's a great tip. Another thing with the T-shirt or something that you bring along, and I'm sure you've done it before, Eric, a lot of times if you're glassing by a bush or a tree or something and the sun's just right, you can hang a shirt up there and actually create a shade, that actually makes it a little more pleasant to glass. I think that's huge. Something I might add is, a couple extra batteries and make sure your headlamps or an extra headlamp, because there's nothing like getting stuck way back in and it gets completely pitch black dark. Having the ability to have light to get yourself out, because I know we've all walked out in the complete dark around, and in Coues country it's sometimes very unforgiving. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier with when I was younger, my dad always had tons of stuff in his pack, and I'd been with him when we'd gone out with his hunting partners, and they'd given him crap about why he had so much stuff in his pack. And I remember my dad saying when I was really young, everything I have in this pack I needed at one point, so that's why I have all the stuff. It's in here knowing how. And knowing how many years my dad had in the field, I knew there was some serious weight to that. So that's when I started asking him, hey, what do you have in your pack? Or paying attention to what he had in his pack, and then getting that same stuff in my pack. Or, my other mentors growing up that were veteran hunters, I would just, poke their brain and be like, hey, what are you carrying?
And I see people, they ask you the same thing on your Instagram. That stuff's valuable because you're cutting out a lot of heartache, like with the with extra batteries and headlamps, like you said. I mean, there was one time where I was out scouting and I was way back in, miles and miles, and I thought for sure that the batteries in my headlamp were good, and phone was dead, and I decided to glass till dark, and I ended up walking out, and it was new moon, ironically. So I ended up just trying to remember the trail to get back to the quad and hiking down this ridgeline in the complete dark, and try not to let my mind get the best of me with my imagination. So yeah, it sucks when you're not prepared, so it's always good to run through your pack and make sure everything's good to go.
Yeah, I took a few questions on Instagram, and several of them came in, guys wanting to know what the feed conditions look like in some of the different units. I would ask you, Eric, I've been up here in Colorado. I'm not back to Arizona yet, but, from everything I've heard, we've had very little monsoon rain, but we did have really good winter moisture. What does, some of the units you've been in, what does the feed look like? What does the grass look like? Are the trees, the vegetation, does everything look dead? What's it looking like out there?
So for the most part, I think those winter rains helped a lot. The acorn crops I've seen pretty much in every unit I've staffed have been really, really good. From your scrub oaks to your gambles to white oaks, they all have acorns. The only thing I noticed suffered a little bit this year was the mesquite bean crop. With deer eating that, there just wasn't as many mesquite beans this year because there's a gap in that rainfall. For the monsoon kind of came a little bit later, but for the most part down south, we got tons of rain a little bit later into September, which just is kind of typical with last year as well. So right now down south, it's pretty. There's really good feed. Lots of all the browse that deer like to feed on. There's good banana yucca crops, so the deer love that in the hills. So the feed's real good. In my opinion, better than last year.
Okay. How do you see, and from what you've heard from all your buddies and what you're seeing and your dad and everybody, what about antler growth for Coues deer? What are you thinking? Average, below average, above average? What do you think?
For this year, the bucks that I've seen so far have been great. It's always hard to really get a certain gauge of whether or not it's just with the rain or if it's just because the buck is getting another year on him. Yeah, yeah. But I've seen a lot of non-typical characteristics on bucks this year that weren't present last year. And overall, the bucks that I've seen this year have been overall bigger than last year.
Guys, I want to interrupt this podcast episode real fast to thank you guys for your avid support of this podcast. And I want to remind you that if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. You can also send me a direct message on my Instagram account at jscottoutdoors. I want to thank the sponsors of this podcast. I want to thank the Go Hunt Gear Shop. My friend Cody Nelson is the optics manager there at the Go Hunt Gear Shop. If you have any binoculars, spotting scopes, rifle scopes, range finders, tripods, you name it, anything to do with glassing, if you'd like to purchase them or just talk with Cody, I challenge you to do so. He's a great resource. You can reach out at 702-847-8747. That's extension 2. He takes care of the J. Scott Outdoors listeners. So I appreciate the Go Hunt sponsorship of this podcast, and make sure you tell Cody I sent you. But he will take care of you and give you a great deal. I also want to thank Coues Ultralight Hunting. If you need to find out more about Coues, you can go to kuiu.com. You can also follow on my Instagram storyboard as I take a lot of questions on Coues gear. I appreciate Coues and their sponsorship. Also, phonescope.com. That's phonescope with a K. If you use the JScott19 promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount there. That is the digiscoping device that I use to take videos and photos on my iPhone 10. Also, onxmaps.com. Use the JScott19 promo code. You're going to get a 20% discount there on the Onyx phone app. It's the best mapping app out there. It's right on your phone. It's replaced the GPS for me. It's just an awesome, awesome tool. So, guys, let's get right back to the episode here. Good. That's great news. We've got a question here. Have an October 22, this is DeSoto 80, to have an October 22 Coues hunt. Will be up in the Matazelles strategy and tactics. From my perspective, like Eric said, scouting, and, the amount of scouting that you can put in is going to totally dictate how, probably how you do on the hunt. My strategy, my tactics would be to try and figure out an area that you want to focus on, and then once you figure out that area, then become detail-oriented and try and say, okay, where do I expect the deer to be? Where are the high points in the area where I can get up and use my optical advantage to try and spot as many bucks as I can, and then maybe take some of the strategy and tactic from Dwayne Adams' podcast, and we've talked about it before, and Eric mentions it, where, these early hunts, glassing into the shade and expecting those deer in the shade. Expect when you glass a shady hillside, expect deer to be laying under trees and under, by bushes and, shaded rocks and logs and what have you. And, kind of take a tactical plan of, you're going to work country over. And not just once, you might have to hit it several glassing sessions from several different angles. Eric, what would you throw in there as your strategies and tactics?
So most of the Matazelles is that thick chaparral stuff. So yeah, what you're saying is right on the money. That thicker stuff, you're going to have to get a little bit of a better angle on it. That's you're going to have to get up high and kind of look down into it to kind of piece it apart. Otherwise, you're not going to really see those. Because they're a lot smaller, they look big in the glass. They look like they're bigger bodied than they actually are. So when they're standing in that chaparral stuff, they can disappear pretty easily unless you're looking down in on them. And there's so much brush that it's almost necessary to change glassing angles frequently and that stuff to try to catch those deer in that Matazelle type country. And they can use. Nice thing about the Matazelles is that it's mostly wilderness, so a lot of your access is going to be on foot. So making use of those trails that are already there is pretty vital. Maybe investing in some shin guards or something to walk through that stuff would be nice. But the glassing,
that brush can be brutal. I want to hit on something that you mentioned there. You talk about brush and you talk about the height of the deer, and it's funny when you're exactly right. When you see the deer in your binos, you think, oh, there they are. But when you have a upward-looking angle, in other words, you are looking uphill, that just shrinks the deer even more. Whereas I feel like you make a great point when you're sitting up. If you're looking down and across, but especially down, I feel like you can look over the top and you can look into the brush and into the pockets, where if you just drop down to, say, a level playing field, you're looking straight across, you can't see anything. But you get up, all of a sudden, the country opens up a lot more when you look down and across. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so one thing I always paid attention to when I was hiking around and whatnot in the hills is if I saw a little covey bed, like you're describing, like a little pocket where a deer would go in and lay down, I would look at that bed, get down on it, and look around from that bed and see what points would I be able to see this deer. If this deer was bedded in this bed, how would I even be able to see this deer? And most of the time, you can only see points that are well higher than that bed to even see that. So you have to be real up high and at the right angle to look into those little pockets. And I've had hunts where with Justin Birch you've had on before, where we were hunting a particular buck, and that buck was probably, less than 200 yards away from us the whole hunt, and he was just in a little pocket bed. We were looking straight over the top of him on the hill when we needed to be around looking down in on him. And we ended up not killing that deer, and that deer was there the whole time until he spooked out. So it's important, and like I said, when you're hiking around, it helps to just, when you see those beds, just get down in on them and look and see, where would I have to be to see this deer if he was a bedded deer, and that'll kind of put it a little bit into better perspective where you need to be to glass.
So you're talking about actually when you're walking around and you see a deer bed, you actually get down on the ground level, like Coues deer level, and look around and think, okay, where could I see my position that I'm, sitting in right now? That's a very good perspective. I like that.
Thanks.
How much would you say your glassing for Coues deer, like when you're picking your spot to look from, what percentage would be it's like as high as you can possibly get, as opposed to, just a knob? Like if you had a choice over a high one or a low one or a medium, like how much is I want to get as high as I can get?
Yeah, there's always trade-off when you're trying to pick the spot to glass. Sometimes it would be nicest to be as high as you could, because that's the best view to be up high and look down in. The only exception to that rule is if you have those thick mesquite canopies or like heavy oak. Sometimes it's better to have a little bit, not such a harsh angle looking down in, because you're just looking at canopy. It might be better to kind of be a little bit lower on the hill. And then the other part is I'm always faced with the trade-off. Hey, do I hike the extra mile to get up on this taller peak, or do I get on this lower peak where it's going to be easier to get off of, especially if bow hunting? Yeah, if you see them, it'd be nice to be on that medium-sized peak instead of that real tall one, because then you got to get back down. So it's always kind of like I always just gamble in my head and kind of just go off my own hunch of what to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think you mentioned the trade-off. Sometimes going to the highest point, I like to get as high as I can, but there is a trade-off. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you get so high and you get so far away from the deer, your detailed glassing goes by the wayside. You're now so far away, you can't really pick it apart. So, there's kind of a happy medium of getting some good elevation where you can look down and across into the brush, but where that you have, if you're glassing with 15s or 10s or 25, whatever you're glassing with, you have to kind of play to what you have in your pack. If you've only got 10s, don't get super, super far away, because your detail will, shrink up. If you've got real heavy, high-powered glass, then, maybe you can afford to get way far away from the deer. But I think you also brought up a good point about some of those mesquite thickets, as you mentioned, especially on these early hunts. They'll have full foliage, at the top of the trees, whereas if you're kind of in those situations looking across at a mesquite bench, if you're looking down on it, you won't see anything unless the deer comes out any of the corners. But sometimes you want to be level with it so you can almost look under the green foliage at the top and just look at those dark mesquite branches and where it opens up, because most mesquite trees, are about Coues deer height as far as where the green bush part of the tree hangs down. And if you're at the right level, you can sometimes look right in there. Whereas, the guy that's hunting in the Mattazelles, that's hunting a lot of, manzanita and some of that stuff, you can't look through that. You almost have to look down on top of it. So that's an interesting point that you bring up there.
Yep.
Let's see. Says Jake's Broncos family has a couple of tags. This is our first Coues deer hunt. Anything specific I should look out for? Something that comes to my mind is, a family hunt. I would assume that maybe you've got some kids in there, some younger hunters. Make sure they have a pair of binoculars, and make sure that you put them in a position where they can see deer, whether it be bucks, does. Make sure that they can see javelina. the last thing you want to do is take a kid up there. You don't have a pair of binos for him to look through or her to look through, and they sit there for 15 minutes. Well, they're going to get bored and they're going to start throwing rocks, and they're not going to enjoy it. So from a family perspective, make sure everybody has binoculars to look through. And I really liked Dwayne's thing about, take a kid and pay them $1 for every deer they spot, and that's going to keep them, a lot more engaged in the hunt. But as far as things to look out for, I think one of the beauties of being able to hunt Coues deer, especially say in southern Arizona, is you get to hunt some of that classic, traditional, just yellow grass, mesquite, just that beautiful oak, that country that we all fall in love with. I think, if you're anything like me, you love the deer, Eric, but you also fall in love with the country, whether it be the low desert country, the middle country. The Coues deer country is unique, throughout North America. There's Coues deer country, and all Coues deer hunters know when they spot Coues deer country because it has that look.
Yeah.
Anything you'd throw in there for family kind of going on their first Coues hunt?
Yeah. The thing with the binos is for sure it's his first. I take it it's his first hunt as well, or just the first hunt as a family.
Sounds like, I'm not sure, but it sounds like kind of some first timers going Coues hunting.
That's nice thing because it'll be a learning experience for everybody. Maybe point out things to the kiddos if there's kids along, or someone that's not as for me, when I've taken people that weren't as experienced, I would make sure I took the time to explain the plants that we were walking past, what the deer like to eat, any kind of sign. I would point to signs, say, well, yeah, what did that track come from? Makes it into more of a game and a learning experience rather than just let's hike to this hill, And things with spotting the deer too, kind of being positive about each deer you spot. I remember when I was younger and my dad gave me the binos for the first time, and we're in Unit 33, which is a great place to start glassing for deer. And one thing I might recommend too is for them to go to a place that's got a lot of deer first, and just to break out the binos and just start looking at deer. That might be a nice confidence booster for the hunt. But I remember, he gave me the pair of binos, and I was spotting all these deer, and he would take the time to, I'm sure they were deer that he had already saw, but he would take the time to say, hey, I have a deer on this hill, and he would take the time to go look at the deer. So it made me feel like I was, starting to become a hunter and actually, finding some stuff. So that's very important, getting those kiddos involved and everybody that's on the hunt, making sure they're involved in the hunt, looking out for plants. That's another fun thing to do.
Something I might add as well, Eric, is if you're new to Coues deer hunting, one of the things that you have to understand is I highly recommend stabilizing your binoculars on a tripod. Yeah. We've talked a lot about it on my podcast, but you also have to understand that a Coues deer can be standing in the wide open, not just standing there. And you glass them up, and you're excited that you see a buck, and then you look away to get your buddy's attention, and you look back in your binos. Now, granted, they're on a tripod, and they're totally still. And you look back in your binos, and you think, he's gone. The buck's gone. Where'd he go?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the deer turns his head, and he was standing in the same field of view. He never moved. He just changed his head in a different position. So they can be extremely hard to see, and they blend in very, very well. So that brings up a couple of points. One is you have to be very meticulous. You have to glass slow, but know that when you find a deer, a lot of times you need to look around, because especially in these early seasons, when you find a buck, most of the time there'll be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other bucks within 20 or 30 yards, all bedded together. Have you seen situations where you see one buck and then all of a sudden it leads to 5 more bucks bedded down right there all together?
Yeah. That actually, when that recent scouting trip I went with that guy up here, That guy had glassed up. I think he said he saw $1 or $2. I think he said a couple bucks, and there were spikes. And then I looked back, and there was another $2, a little bit farther right on the hill. And I'm like, they kind of acted like there was another deer around. So I kept looking, and that's my fault. Found that more mature buck that bedded down pretty quick. So you're right on the money, and that's a good point. That if you see a buck, there's more oftentimes than not they're with other deer around on that same hill. It's very rare that you see a spike or a young buck or any kind of buck and he's by himself. More times than not, there's more deer around.
I went on your Instagram and you were fielding Coues questions as well, which you do very good job at
Thank you.
Answering the questions. I want to read one here because I think it's important, and I think you can elaborate a little bit on it. Importance of patience when glassing, staying in one spot looking for that nose or ear flick. And you answer, you say, I start out glassing quick, panning skylines first, then edges where a buck could slip by quick. Then I slow down to a moderate speed, panning across the hillsides and in spots I know bucks to be. Then I'll slow way down and look for those small bits and pieces like a nose, an ear, a tine, etc. I approach it as dissecting the brush and trying to prove that there is a deer in every shadow rather than thinking the other way around. Patience is hard, and I notice the more I glass, the more patient I am each time I go, and the more minute details that I'm able to pick up on. You also add in the next slide, also, if I have a lot of country in front of me, I might not move for a whole half a day. If I'm only looking at a bowl or small country, I will hike out to look at a different ridge or simply get a different angle on the same country. Sometimes changing angles is exactly what resulted in finding particular bucks in the past. Best to be proactive the whole day. Invest in a good butt pad and shade system so sitting all day isn't a pain. I throw a cloth over my head and it blocks out the sun and extra light, so I have bright picture in my binos. The part to me that jumps out, there's lots of great info in this, but the speed of glassing, and let's in conclusion here today, let's talk a little bit about kind of the speed of glassing when it comes to Coues deer. I'm totally with you that at first light, I'm in full kind of scan mode, almost like just kind of rapid fire, just really hitting spots back and forth, up and down, lots of panning, hitting open areas, hitting saddles, and then you nailed it as the light starts getting there, and maybe after the first hour, then it just starts slowing down. Talk a little bit about and you did, I just read it, but dive in a little bit on the speed at which you glass, and your eye is obviously looking through the binos, picking things out and telling your brain, but if you go too fast, you can miss things. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I used to be pretty horrible when I first started glassing. When I would go out with my dad, I would just try to mirror him, and there wasn't much explanation there on what to do. So I would just pan, and most of the time I panned faster than my dad. I'd get tired, after an hour of glassing, and kind of feel like we're wasting our time sitting there. And then he would see deer, in another half hour, and I'm like, well, crap, I missed that deer. And I started glassing with my mentor growing up, Ronnie Grimes, and he was interesting that he would glass with his binos. I think he had a pair of 10 or 20s. I can't remember. I can't remember what it would take with him when we would go, but he would glass with his binos first, and then as the day got on, he switched to a spotting scope, which for me I couldn't do because I have a hard time, shutting one eye off and just looking through with one eye solely. But the main point there was he would slow down and start to dissect every little bush, as time went on. And so I asked him about it, and I started to come up with that method, which I've kind of reaffirmed a lot of guys do that. I'm sure like yourself, you do that as well. Or that first light, I'm scanning all the skylines were a deer could easily slip over. And if it's that particular buck that I'm looking for, it'd be great to know he went over the hill at first light rather than spend the whole day looking for him on the hillside. Or you catch a deer coming over, and then you're set to go to watch him for the whole morning, so you can make your move. So I start out panning the Skyline first, which you can do very quickly. Deer sticks out like a sore thumb on the Skyline, and then as the light starts getting a little bit better, I start to pan the hillsides, and I just do a simple left to right pan, right to left, just sweeping the hillsides. I will look if it's an area I'm familiar with, where I know the deer tend to hang out. I'll just zoom over to those spots and look real quick, because most times the deer I'm looking for is in that spot. So I just kind of cut to the chase rather than slowly glassing the hillsides until I can get to that deer. And then if all that fails and I'm not seeing the type of deer that I want to, glassing that way and panning the hillsides pretty fast, I'll start to slow down. About that time, it's nice because the deer are slowing down as well. So you're not getting deer that are running around the hillside feeding and whatnot. So I start to slow down. The thing is with slowing down is you're giving your eyes a little bit more opportunity to catch movement. Because if you're moving the binos fast, it's hard to catch, even a deer walking. You think about it like trying to you're driving 70 on the highway and you're trying to read a sign, that's right on the side of the road. You got to kind of slow down. So it'll get to the point where if I have enough country in front of me, I'll slow way down. I'll just, I'll spend, like if I have a good hillside, I might spend an hour picking it apart. If I'm confident there's a buck hiding in there somewhere. And most of the time they're there. You just need to slow down, and there's times where what led to me spotting a buck was like half of a nose and you could just see the white outline on the nose. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you're like, wow, you sucker, you're hiding right there, Yeah. So yeah, is there anything else you want me to go into depth there, or is that?
No, I think you nailed it. For people out there, when I get up to a new glassing spot, and let's say it's 10 o'clock in the morning, or let's say it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When I first get to a glassing spot, I put my butt pad down, I put my tripod up, and I put my binos on the tripod, and I immediately do exactly what you're saying. I hit the tops of the ridges, I hit the open spots, and for the first 10 minutes, I'm panning. I'm just literally panning here, there, and everywhere. Just looking around, no distinct pattern. I'm trying to cover basically a broad scan of everything very, very quickly to see if anything is just obvious that's jumping out. I'm also trying to see, like you say, at the tops of these ridges. When I first sit down, I want to sit down and say, okay, I don't want anything to get away from me, so look at the places where it can get away from me. Okay, the tops of the ridges, tops of the hills, okay, hitting that. Then I go, okay. I say, which hillside do I want to start with? And then I do the exact same thing. I start towards the top, and I just start panning back and forth, left and right, left and right, left and right, just sweeping back and forth. Once I've kind of covered that hill, I kind of move over and go, okay. And I basically start where I left off, and I scan left to right on that, portion of the hill or the cut or the bowl. And then I just keep moving around, and then I keep shifting my butt, if you will, and shifting my position. Sometimes I have to lift my tripod, and where I've covered everything, from my left to my right that's in my sight picture. And so I've scanned fast, then I've kind of left, right, scanned slower. Then maybe I'll spin completely around and glass the other side and do the same thing. Fast scan, slow scan left to right. And then I go back to the original spot, and that's when I do what you say, where I start looking into the brush. At this point, I'm not scanning. I'm more just having the binos stationary in one position, letting my eyes swim around.
Exactly.
And just looking for any movement. And one thing I found is if you catch those birds flicking and moving, if you're going that slow, that's typically when you can start seeing more deer. And a good rule of thumb out there, and then Eric, I'll let you go because you've been awesome. If it works for me, if I get to a point where I am not seeing deer, I always tell myself slow down.
Yep.
And typically, once I slow down, I pick up a deer, and I'm like, that deer's been there the whole time, and I was just going too fast.
Yeah, it makes you feel kind of stupid, doesn't it?
Don't you think, too? Yeah, and they're laying in the wide open. Doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I think there has been some people that have been hampered or they've been hindered in talking about the grid system and, glassing slow and all that. I think there's some people that actually get hurt by that because at first they don't scan and they don't look quick into the, high probability areas, and they start out, they get to their glassing point and they start slowly on one hill, just slowly looking, and they miss a buck that's just standing in the wide open. So for all of the people out there listening, if you're new, scan quickly at first, and then, as Eric says, just slowly start progressing your pace down to where, you may be a couple hours in and you're just sitting there in one spot, and then you just move it over 10 feet, and you're just looking, and you're looking, and you're looking at everything around, and then you just move it over. So it's an interesting topic, and I appreciate all of your thoughts today. It's always great talking to you, and want to give you a chance to let people know where they can follow along. I like watching your Instagram, so make sure you mention that.
Yeah, so you can follow me. Thanks for the kind words too, by the way, Jay. You can follow me on Instagram at Eric Forrest. It's ERIC _FORREST. And then I also I throw up some videos on YouTube under Backcountry Origins, and that's also on Instagram. Just for fun, just throwing up videos of deer every now and then. Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually working on throwing together a bunch of videos from my buck from this year. So hopefully that'll go up next week. So. And then also my Amazon storefront is in my in the bio of my Instagram, on my Instagram profile as well, so you can check out all the trail cameras and random gear that I recommend on there as well.
Awesome. Well, Eric, I really appreciate you having you on the podcast. And for the listeners out there, lean on Eric. He's a young guy, but he's grown up hunting with some of the best Coues hunters in the world, and a lot has rubbed off on this young guy, and he's very experienced for someone of his age, and I just love following along your Instagram. You've been doing a great job for a long time, so keep it up, and thanks for sharing with us here on the podcast.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for having me on. It's always an honor.
All right, buddy. God bless. Take care.
Thank you as well.